Have you heard about the Lululemon murder? If you're having problems with one of your coworkers, listen to this because your life might depend on it. Okay, so boom, let's jump right into it. Brittany Norwood was an employee for Lululemon located in Maryland. Brittany had a very long criminal history of stealing. She stole from family and friends, and her ex-boyfriend even had to get a restraining order against her because she broke into his house and robbed him. And now that Brittany was working at Lululemon's, things were no different. She began stealing when she would work, and the employees and managers started noticing things missing also when she would work. They knew she was stealing, but they needed proof. They needed to actually catch her stealing. That brings us to Jana Murray, a 30-year-old woman who also worked at Lululemon. One night, both Brittany and Jana had closing shifts, and when they were done, it was time to leave. Policy is to check every staff member bag before they leave, so that's exactly what Jana did. She checked Brittany's bag, and of course, she found a pair of leggings that was not paid for. Brittany was stealing, and she finally got caught. Jana then told Brittany that she would have to tell the store manager, and Brittany tried to convince her that she did pay for it, but of course, that wasn't true. Jana locked the door, and Brittany and Jana now were making their way home. This is when Brittany made her plan. She didn't want to get fired for stealing, so she lured Jana back into Lululemon. She called Jana saying that she left her Metro card inside the store and she needed Jana to unlock the door so she could get it and go home. Of course, Jana comes back to help, but unfortunately, Jana did not know this would be her last moments on earth. Brittany lured Jana to the back hallway and attacked her with these weapons found in the store. She used 5 of the weapons and she stabbed Jana 331 times cold-blooded. As all this screaming and dragging was happening, there was an Apple store next to Lululemon with CCTV cameras, and as you can see, they went to the wall listening to the whole thing, but they didn't call the cops because they thought it was petty drama. After the murder happened, she then tried to stage the scene and make it look like they were robbed. She emptied the cash register. She took a Lululemon size 13 shoe and walked on blood to make fake footprints, washed the shoe off and put it back on the shelf, cut herself all over her body to make it seem like she was attacked. She drove Jana's car like 3 miles away. She even cut off her crotch area so that they could think that she was sexually assaulted. She then zip-tied her hands and feet to make it seem like she was robbed and waited till somebody found her the next day. But did her plan work? Like and follow for part 2. Lululemon murder case part 2. Okay, so boom, like I said, after killing Jana, she tried to make it seem like they were robbed. So she emptied out the cash registers, she cut herself, she moved her car. Just a lot of things, including tying herself up and waiting for someone to find her to make it seem like this was a robbery gone extremely wrong. Everyone believed her at first, but after investigators started investigating, things were not adding up. The Apple employees next to the Lululemon store said that they didn't hear any men speaking. They only heard women speaking and screaming, not the men that Brittany claimed robbed them. And when they eventually found Jana's car that Brittany moved, they found Brittany's blood and Jana's blood in the car. Also, while Brittany was being interrogated, at one point the investigators stepped out and left her and her brother in the room by themselves. At that point, she basically confessed to the killing, not knowing that they were being recorded the whole time. She's been convicted of first-degree murder, premeditated, and she is sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Watch out for your coworkers, guys.
My friend's dad tried to kidnap me. Okay, so I had a best friend when I was 12 named Tanya. We had been friends for 2 years, but we never met outside school. Until right before spring break, she asked if I could come to her house to play Call of Duty with her. We had always played online with each other before, just as separate houses, so she wanted to play in person for the first time. So I told her I have to ask my mom first. So I asked my mom, and surprisingly she said yes. So my mom drove to her home and met Tanya's mom and dad, and then my mom left. Then Tanya's mom left. I asked her where was her mom going, and then she told me that wasn't her mom. I asked who was it. She said she didn't know. Then I said, why did she tell my mom that she was your mom? And Tanya looked dead in my eyes and said, no, your mom assumed it was my mom, and started laughing. I thought that was strange, but then Tanya said, let's play the game. So we went upstairs to her room to play the game. Stay tuned for part 2. After hours of playing the game, I began to look at the time. I noticed it was after 7, so I asked Tanya, can I use her phone to call my mom? And she said, no, my dad will take you home. Then she went downstairs and started whispering to her dad. I couldn't hear what they were saying, so I started walking downstairs. And then the stairs started creaking, and they completely became silent. Then her dad stood at the end of the staircase and said, are you ready? I said, yes. Then we went outside to get in the car, and I noticed Tanya stayed at the front door. She wasn't getting in the car, and she yelled at me from the front door saying, I'm gonna miss you. And tears came down her eyes. I was like, I'll see you at school tomorrow. Don't cry. But she didn't say a word. She just watched me get in the car. Her dad began to drive, and I ended up falling asleep. When I woke up, I seen that it was really dark outside. So I looked at the time on the car radio, and it said 9:30. That means we were driving for an hour and a half, which was confusing because I literally lived 15 minutes away. So I asked him, where are we going? He looked at me in the rear mirror and said, shh, go back to sleep. So I started screaming, I want to go home, really loud. So he pulled over, and when he got out the car, I unbuckled myself and ran out the car. I started running. I didn't know where I was, but it was a highway, so I kept running until I seen a convenience store. I ran inside and told the clerk to call 911. Long story short, the police came and I told them everything.
This story will send a chill down your spine. This is The Ride.
A guy named Brad moved to a small town in Georgia and was settling in, meeting his new neighbors. And he learned that most of the residents there believed that one of the back roads that led in and out of town was haunted.
But Brad didn't believe in ghosts, so he never really asked much about it.
One day, he went to visit a buddy who lived an hour outside of town. The two ended up going to dinner and stayed out late, much later than he had planned.
And by the time he left for home, it was late, around midnight.
As he was driving, the road was pitch black. He could barely even see ahead of him. He was almost home when he squinted to see a woman walking along the road alone. Normally, he would have driven past, but it was late and it was about to start storming any second, so he decided to offer her a ride. She got into his car and held her hands up to the vents to capture the warmth, eventually taking off her jacket when she warmed up. And it was good timing as it started storming as soon as she got in the car. She thanked Brad for picking her up and said her name was Eve and directed him to her home.
Eve was kind and just seemed lost.
They eventually pulled up to her house, she thanked him again, and she went inside. But when Brad got home, he discovered that she had left her jacket in his car. He wanted to return it, so the next morning he drove back to the house where he dropped her off and rang the bell. An older woman answered the door, and he handed her the jacket. Brad said, I gave your daughter Eve a ride home last night, and she left this in my car.
It was then the woman began to cry.
As she wiped away the tears, the woman said, my daughter Eve was struck by a hit-and-run driver years ago. It happened on that back road, and when she was hit, she was wearing a jacket just like this one. After that, Brad became a believer and knew why all the locals spoke so often of that road being haunted.
He just had no idea that he would end up giving that ghost a ride home.